We end chapter 6 trying to figure out where do we go from here. We have to look at ecological footprints, and the things that we have to keep in mind, things we have to consider, is the total area of land and water ecosystems needed to provide resources an individual or a population uses, and afterwards, what happens to all the wastes that a population generates. So we have to take into account resources used as well as waste, how to deal with the waste that's produced. So resources include energy, food, water, and shelter. Wastes include sewage and greenhouse gases. We use these calculations to estimate the carrying capacity for humans here on Earth. It's pretty complicated, and it's new, so there's no universally accepted way to calculate it, and they only give a snapshot of a situation at a particular point in time. Footprints can be useful at this point to make comparisons among different populations. What we've heard all along, and what you'll continue to hear in your social studies classes, is that the ecological footprint of Americans is almost twice that in England, twice the ecological footprint of people in Japan, and 6 times the footprint of people in China. This is kind of a funky looking map. You can see right here what a normal world map looks like. But what you see here is the red countries, the red areas of the world have been made fat, bigger in comparison, and the areas with smaller ecological footprints have been shrunken down. The future depends on ecological footprints, population growth, and technology. Research can help us make decisions that can affect the human condition in its future. So here are some case studies. There's ozone layer, about 20 to 50 kilometers above the Earth. Ozone at ground level is a bad thing, but the ozone layer is like an atmospheric sunscreen. It absorbs UV radiation from sunlight. In the 1970s, the satellites saw that the ozone concentration over Antarctica was dropping. There was what's called a hole in the ozone layer. After it was discovered, it grew larger, lasted longer each year. You can see the progression from 1981 to 1999. The darker blue color indicates the ozone layer had thinned. In 1974, researchers found that CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, could break down the ozone layer. These were widely used as propellants in aerosol cans, coolants in refrigerators, freezers, and air conditioners, and in the production of plastic foams like styrofoam. Once the research was published and accepted by the scientific community, it had to go to policymakers. 191 countries signed an agreement called the Montreal Protocol, which banned the use of CFCs. And what you see here is a decrease in the concentration in the atmosphere of those CFCs. They've been steadily decreasing since about 1994 in the atmosphere, and the CFC ban then has shown to have had long-term positive effects. Data predicts that the ozone hole will continue to go up and down from year to year, but it should disappear for good around mid-century is what the prediction is. Here's another case study. Overfishing. From 1950 to 1997, seafood catch grew a huge amount, from 19 million tons to more than 90 million. Declines in fish populations have proved that the fish supply is not renewable. Fishing became more intense and more efficient because there were larger boats and high-technology fish-finding equipment. Catches rose for a time with the advent of this technology, but then it began to fall. There's just been a decrease of cod biomass in the ocean. You can see that from that graph. Fishery ecologists started getting age structure and growth rate data, and they saw and proved that definitively that the fish populations were shrinking. They attributed that decline in overfishing. So what's the solution? The U.S. National Marine Fisheries Service created guidelines for commercial fishing, specified how many fish of what size could be caught in U.S. waters. In 1996, the Sustainable Fisheries Act closed certain areas to fisheries until stocks recover. Other areas are closed seasonally to allow fish to breed and spawn. Aquaculture, the farming of aquatic animals, is also an alternative to commercial fishing with limited environmental damage if properly managed. We saw the problem with that, though, yesterday. The Asian carp was used to clean up those fish farms, and when the floods came, they invaded the Mississippi waterways. The progress in this case study has been slow. Fleets from other countries continue to fish the ocean waters where U.S. has restricted it. Some are reluctant to accept conservation efforts because the regulations for the future cause job and income losses today. It's a hard time. People have a hard time understanding why they don't have a job or a loss of income, or they lose income, to try and think about the future. So this is the challenge. Sustainable practices need to be determined, ensure the long-term health of fisheries with minimal short-term impact on the fishing industry. That's still in the works. Here's another case study about climate change. The most reliable information comes from 2007, the Panel on Climate Change. Data and analyses here have been agreed upon and accepted by 2,500 climate scientists worldwide and their governments. This report confirms that global temperatures are rising, which is what I've said all along, and this is called global warming. Winds and ocean currents shape the climate. So the IPCC report discusses climate change in patterns of temperature, rainfall, other physical environmental factors that can result from global warming. There's much physical and biological evidence that contributes to our current understanding. 11 of the 12 years between 1995 and 2006 were among the warmest since temperature recording began in 1850. Between 1906 and 2005, average global temperature rose almost a degree, 3/4 of a degree. The largest changes are occurring in and near the Arctic Circle, and you saw in Too Hot Not to Handle why that is. You have white surfaces being replaced by darker surfaces, green or gray or black, and so that speeds along that warming pattern in the poles. Here you see a graph of the change in global land surface air temperature. Sea level has risen since 1961 at a rate of 1.8 millimeters each year. Warmer water is expanding, glaciers are melting, as well as ice caps and polar ice sheets. Satellite data confirm that Arctic sea ice, glaciers, and snow cover are decreasing. So on the left, you see the amount of sea ice represented. On the right, you see the sea levels represented. There's an indirect relationship there. The range of an organism is determined by temperature, humidity, rainfall. We've also talked about pH. If those conditions change, the organisms can be affected. The question is then, how can they adapt? How can they adapt? And how quickly can they adapt? If the temperature rises, organisms would move toward cooler places, away from the equator or at higher altitudes. Plant flowering, animal breeding are cued by seasonal changes. If warming is occurring, these organisms should respond as though spring begins earlier. "75 studies covering 1,700 species of plants and animals confirms that many species and communities are responding as though they are experiencing rising temperatures. Yellow-bellied marmots, they're rodents, are coming out of hibernation more than a month earlier than they used to. What we still have to determine is whether like I've been saying, whether current warming is part of a natural cycle coming up out of the last ice age, or whether it's caused by human activity or by other changes. This report from 2007 documents that concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have increased significantly over the last 200 years. Data suggests that this increase is due to the burning of fossil fuels combined with the cutting and burning of forests worldwide. They add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere faster than the carbon cycle removes it. That's partially due to our elimination of a lot of trees that would be part of the carbon cycle, removing that carbon dioxide. Most climate scientists agree that this added carbon dioxide is strengthening the natural greenhouse effect, causing the biosphere to retain more heat. So on the left here we see greenhouse gas concentration, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane through 2005. Kind of remained stable until right before the year 2000. On the right-hand side, you see greenhouse gas emissions by category. Energy supply is a big one right here. Agriculture is a big one. Forestry here. Industry. Transportation. Waste management and residential and commercial buildings, a little bit less of a contribution. At this point, researchers use computer models to predict how much warming is expected. Models are complex, they involve assumptions about climate and human activities, so the predictions are open to debate. As always, these are hypotheses. The IPCC reports the result of 6 different models, which predict that average global temperatures will rise from just under 2 degrees Celsius to as much as 6.4 degrees Celsius higher than they were in the year 2000. So in the next 100 years, in other words, those 6 different models predict either a 2-degree rise all the way up to a 6.4 degree Celsius rise in the Earth's average temperature. Some climate changes are likely to threaten ecosystems ranging from tundra, northern forests, coral reefs, the Amazon rainforest. Sea levels may rise enough to flood coastal ecosystems and human communities. Some models suggest that parts of North America might experience more droughts during the summer. Scientists have been saying for more than 2 decades that the world needs to recognize climate change and take steps. Some of the things that need to be considered: cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions, and that's going to require change, big change. Burning fossil fuels and things like that. Some changes will rely on new technology for renewable energy, more efficient energy use. Electric cars, recycled products, and green buildings are all initiatives to try and help. Nations of the world have been holding international climate summits. They attempt to work out agreements to protect the atmosphere and climate. So the big question at this point, where do we go from here? How do we change this for you guys and for the future of our world?